Good morning, everybody. We have a can't miss show for you here today because I'm going to tell you what the leading cause of death among young women ages 20 to 49 is. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to A Different Perspective. I'm Dr. Jesse Anderson, filling in for Dr. Patrick Flynn. We're now in March, so we're kicking off Autoimmune Month. Lots of very, very important and exciting things here to talk about. And like I teased early on, what is the leading cause of death among young women ages 20 to 49? Yes, in fact, the answer to that question is autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease is incredibly prevalent, very, very common, and unfortunately is very, very destructive to a lot of people and a lot of people's health. So we're going to talk all about it. I'm going to teach you guys about what it is, and most importantly, what can be done about it, and how we need to start thinking about things a little bit differently. So like I was saying, autoimmune disease, we need to start paying attention to where it comes from. What is autoimmune disease? What is it? Well, WebMD actually defines it as this. Your immune system fights off harmful germs and other things that shouldn't be in your body. So sometimes things go wrong and then it starts attacking healthy tissue and becomes a threat. So that's the problem here. When the immune system starts becoming overactive, it'll actually start damaging and attacking normal, healthy tissue inside your body. We should have a normal, healthy immune response. We've talked about that a ton over the years, guys. What do we need that immune system for? We got to keep our bodies healthy. And if you have a strong, healthy immune response, you should be able to fight off infections, fight off germs, fight off things like that. But what if your immune system is a little bit too active, a little bit too hyperactive? That's when it certainly starts to become a problem. And then if there is things that are going a little bit haywire now, we're going to actually start to cause damage to our body overall. So when we start looking at why it actually happens, they're not actually sure. So WebMD again says that researchers think that there's two reasons that it's going to happen. First of all, you're going to get genes from your parents. It's going to be a genetic type issue, or you're going to have something triggered by the environment, such as a virus. Okay, and autoimmune disease absolutely does affect women far more than men. So they do suspect there might be a hormonal component there. But again, at the end of the day, there's just a lot of unknown out there. They're not exactly sure exactly where it comes from and what to do about it. And in fact, right here, Medline Plus even literally says the exact cause of autoimmune disorders is unknown. Treatments can't cure autoimmune diseases. Oh boy. Oh boy. So what's the plan? What are they actually going to do about it? What's standard medical treatment for an autoimmune disease? Well, quite frankly, they're going to use certain medications, namely corticosteroids and immunosuppressants. So we have to kill that immune system. The immune system is working too strong. We got to kill it off. But actually, if we can pull that up one more time, look at the bottom of that slide right there. This is important safety information about Humira. Humira is the most prevalent autoimmune medication. And actually, it just took over as #1 top medication being given out in the entire country. But since its entire job is to suppress your immune system, what's it going to do? If you're suppressing the immune system, well, now you're going to be much more susceptible to various types of infections. Also, let's not forget about cancer. Your body produces cancer cells every day. That's a completely normal, healthy response to cellular division. It's only when it actually starts to become out of control that it becomes a problem. We have parts of our immune system that are completely designed to kill off those cancer cells as they're being produced. No big deal. It's a part of normal cellular division. It's only when now that immune system becomes compromised that those cancer cells start to divide uncontrollably, and we start to see a major problem in that regard. So if we're now suppressing the immune system, Well, now we're also suppressing those natural killer cells that are actually designed to fight off those cancer cells that are just naturally being produced. The other main treatment there, the other main medication is going to be some kind of corticosteroid. Corticosteroids, long-term use of them is incredibly dangerous and widely regarded as something that should just absolutely never be done, despite the fact that it is done often. It's done often because there's no other solution. Okay, your immune system's out of control, great. Let's flood you full of corticosteroids. Let's make sure that we're keeping that immune system suppressed so we're slowing down that response, that damage, that degeneration within your body, which is certainly problematic. And when you're told that we don't know why this is going on, there's no cure, we don't know what caused it, I don't know. Do you just feel a little hopeless? Do you just feel a little hopeless and like you might as well just throw in the towel and give up? Honestly, that's kind of how they leave you because they don't have an answer for you. So here, we need to start having a different perspective on things. We need to start thinking about things very differently because the very first premise I'm already gonna disagree with. The initial premise of in your body, we look at the immune system and what happens, guys? What happens to that immune system? Something goes wrong. Something goes wrong. The body made a mistake. Well, I'm sorry, the body doesn't make mistakes. We're going to have a normal response to whatever's going on inside the body. If something's happening in the body, if you have a disease, it's not because something went wrong and you now have that disease. It's that your body is now adapting to its environment, and that's how it ultimately ended up. If you have, for example, type 2 diabetes, now no, that's not an autoimmune disease, but if you have type 2 diabetes, it's actually a survival mechanism. It's different. It's a different way of thinking about it, but if you didn't have type 2 diabetes, you'd already be dead. Cancer. If you didn't have cancer, guess what? You'd already be dead because that's your body adapting to what's going on the inside. Your body is actually adapting to the changes that are going on within the environment in order to allow that survival mechanism to happen. Okay? And what's also interesting too is that they say that they don't know what causes it, but then they immediately tell you what causes it. So we don't know what causes autoimmune disease. However, inflammation damages joints, nerves, muscles, skin, and other parts of the body. Well, don't tell me you don't know what causes it and then immediately tell me what causes it. Now, what they're saying is they don't know what causes the inflammation. But it'll also tell you that they're not trying to find out what causes the inflammation. That's not their job. You have an autoimmune disease. We're going to treat your disease. We're going to manage your symptoms. Where it came from, they're not even asking that question. They're not even asking that question. So once we start to change the narrative and actually change our viewpoint, then we can actually find out what we can do to actually get things back up and running for you. Because the goal is certainly to get your body to function normally on its own. Find out why these things actually happen. Find out why you ended up with this disease state. Find out why your immune system is so hyperactive to the point where it's causing damage and destruction within your own body. Okay? How are we going to do that? We'll get to that in a little bit. Stay tuned, everybody. They have another premise that I also have to wildly disagree with. Where does it come from? First, genes from your parents. You're sick because your parents were sick. You have this autoimmune disease because your parents had this autoimmune disease. Well, I'm here to challenge that. For all of you listening who have autoimmune diseases, do your parents have those autoimmune diseases? They might. But I'd actually suspect that the majority of you are going to say no. The majority of you are going to say no. I actually had a patient come in who her medical doctor told her that she was infertile because of her genes. She was genetically infertile, and that's why she couldn't have babies. And I did a double take when she said that. And I looked her dead in the eye and I said, are you honest to God telling me that your medical doctor told you that you can't have kids because your parents can't have kids? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. So, are you sick because your parents are sick? No. What did you learn from your parents? What did you get from your parents, though? Bad habits. You learned things that got you sick from your parents. If your parents were sick, there's a better chance that you're going to be sick because you learned lifestyle from them. You learned lifestyle from them. So let's talk basic genetics. Let's boil down genetics to its most basic component. The most fundamental component of all genetics is that the rate of a certain genetic trait will not change. It's not going to change unless some kind of major catastrophic event occurs. So if there's a plague that comes through and every person with blue eyes is killed by this plague for some reason, well, now the genetic population of people with blue eyes is going to go way down and brown-eyed people are going to take over and dominate. Okay? If certain genetic traits are starting to be selected for by some kind of specific event, then and only then will we see the actual rates of certain genetic traits change. So if you're going to have a gene that causes an autoimmune disease, can someone please tell me why autoimmune disease rates are going up? The NIH, National Institute of Health, autoimmunity may be on the rise. Back in the 80s, early 90s, 11% of people roughly had an autoimmune disease, 22 million. Fast forward to the late 90s, early 2000s. Now we're up to 11.5. Not a dramatic change, but still, when you look at the number of people, that goes from 22 million to 27 million. So that's a giant jump. Only go forward a few years after that, 2011, 2012, we're now up to 15.9, which means 41 million people are suffering from autoimmune diseases. 41 million people are suffering from autoimmune disease. And that was still 10 years ago. That was still 10 years ago. The rates are astronomically higher now. No, this cannot be genetic. Now, where genetics does play a role is that if your mom had Hashimoto's, that's an autoimmune thyroid disease, and you go down that same path, yes, you're more likely to end up with Hashimoto's than some other type of disease, some other type of chronic disease. But that's only because your body's sick in the first place. So let's find out why your body's sick in the first place and make sure that you never end up that way. Let's make sure that you take care of yourself properly so you never end up with that disease. Genes are not your destiny. You are not destined to end up with this autoimmune disease simply because your parents had this kind of disease. That's not how it works. Not how it works at all. So where else does it possibly come from? Well, it could be triggered by the environment, such as a virus. You know what? I actually agree with this one. I actually do agree with this one. So yes, viruses can trigger autoimmune diseases. They can. What did I just say before, though? Only if you don't have a healthy immune response. That's only going to happen if your body can't handle that virus and can't respond properly to that illness. Okay? We have viruses in our body all the time. There are certain viruses that once they enter our body, they never leave. Chickenpox is a great example. Have you had chickenpox? I hope so. I did when I was 2. And if you've had chickenpox, that virus is still in your body. It's still there. It's not going anywhere. So what happens? What happens? Why does that virus just hang out? Well, it's okay because our immune system deals with it. Our immune system, when it's strong and healthy and doing its job, it's going to keep that virus at bay, and it's not actually going to become problematic. Now, let's say down the road, you aren't taking great care of yourself, and you end up getting very sick, and your immune system starts to become compromised. Well, what happens then? Oh, now our immune system can't handle that latent virus that's been in our body for so long. And now all of a sudden, we start to see that it actually comes back and it starts to flare back up. And if you down the road, you end up with shingles, which is that same virus that you had when you were a kid, but now you have something different. It manifests in a different way because now your body is very different when you're older than when you're a child. When you get it as a child, you have a very strong immune response, actually, and your body can just deal with that. It's only when you start to actually see compromise with that immune system that you see these things become incredibly problematic. Okay, so what's the last thing that Medline Plus told us? The exact cause of autoimmune disorders is unknown. Treatments cannot cure autoimmune disease. Well, I do agree that you cannot cure an autoimmune disease. I don't really like that word cure because it implies that, oh, I was sick, now I'm not sick. Well, let's pay attention to that. If you come in and you have an autoimmune disease. And we start working with you and we start to reverse that disease process, and your labs come back completely normal, and for all intents and purposes, you no longer have that autoimmune disease. Are you in the clear? Are you good? You don't have to worry about that anymore ever again? Not really. Yeah, not really. And here's why. Because you need to make sure that you're still taking care of yourself. Because your body went down that road before, odds are it's going to go down that road again. That's the direction it wants to go. So if you're not taking care of yourself, it's just going to keep going down that path. It's just going to keep going down that path. And I've seen lots of times, lots of cases where someone had rheumatoid arthritis, real severe, debilitating joint destruction. In very severe cases, the fingers can actually start to, deform and start to become very mal-shaped. And we start to get that person out of pain, and they're feeling great as long as they're taking care of themselves. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, now that inflammation is going to return, and along with that inflammation comes that autoimmune response again. Okay? So we start to see all those things go back down that same road. So just because you're in the clear, just because that autoimmune disease that you've had is no longer actively causing destruction and actively damaging your body, that doesn't mean you're just fine and you don't need to worry about it anymore, right? It means instead that you have to be extra diligent to make sure that you stay good, that you stay that way, because you don't want those things to return. And I would argue it's just as important if your body isn't going down that road. If you never ended up with an autoimmune disease in the first place, that doesn't mean you can slack off. It means things are okay for now. Let's keep it that way. Let's keep it that way and make sure that we actually end up fine. The earlier part of that slide said what? The exact cause is unknown. But wait a minute. Is it unknown? Because not that long ago, only within the last 10, 15 years, they discovered a new hormone called zonulin, which I like that name, zonulin. It sounds very like sci-fi to me. It's a pretty great name. So zonulin actually regulates the intestinal barrier. And it's the biological door to inflammation, autoimmunity, and cancer. Oh, interesting. Interesting. So what does this article tell us? It tells us that what's going to cause that systemic inflammation through our body, what's going to actually open the doors to allow your body to go down those disease paths, is going to be this hormone right here called zonulin. Why on earth would you want such a thing? Why does your body make a hormone whose entire job it is to cause disease? Oh, I didn't say that's what it does. I didn't say that's what it does. But if left uncontrolled, that's the exact path it's going to go. That's the exact route it's going to go, because zonulin's job is to open up the GI tract, open up that GI barrier. Okay? So if you've heard of something called leaky gut, that's what we're talking about. Leaky gut happens for a reason. It happens for a reason. It doesn't just, it's not just, again, that you weren't lucky. It's not, again, that it was a genetic type issue. It happens for a reason. There's only a couple reasons why it happens, which we'll talk about in a second. But let's actually first talk about that whole process. Within the GI tract, you actually have these things called tight junctions, which are designed to hold those cells in the GI tract so tight together that nothing's going to slip between the cracks. However, if your gut is inflamed, if you do have some other issues going on, now those tight junctions will start to break down. Zonulin is produced, which is actually opening up those tight junctions and allowing things to slip through the cracks there. If left uncontrolled, that's going to lead to different, food intolerances, food allergies, starts to flare up that immune response, and that's one of the only known causes of actual autoimmune disease. So what I'm telling you, number one, is if you do have an autoimmune disease, let's start looking other places. Oh, I have autoimmune thyroid disease. I have Hashimoto's. Are we only going to stare at your thyroid? If you do, you're never going to find out what's causing it. Oh, I have Crohn's disease. Well, honestly, Crohn's disease is one of the ones where people actually are looking in the right place, because Crohn's disease is autoimmune destruction of the gut. That's where you need to be looking. You need to be looking at that gut, except they're still looking in the wrong place because leaky gut takes place in the small intestines, Crohn's disease takes place in the large intestine. So you got to actually look in the right place. Where are things happening? Why did things start in the first place? And then how can we actually cause that change to help the body heal and repair? So there are only 2 recognized stimuli that will actually open the doors for a leaky gut. Bacterial imbalance of the GI tract, and sorry everyone, gluten. That's it. So if you have an autoimmune disease, what am I saying? Get off gluten. Get off wheat for sure. Get off all processed grains for sure. Wheat, corn, barley, rye. Yes, I don't mind being the bad guy here. Several of you might be very mad at me now for saying this. I don't care. Because these are things that should not be eaten. Because they're actually causing damage. They're causing destruction of the GI tract. Leaky gut is viewed as the precondition to autoimmune disease. If you have leaky gut, your body is going to start going down that road for autoimmune disease. Now, for some people, it's going to take so long for that autoimmune disease to actually occur that you're no longer going to be alive by the time that happens. And that's why I can't flat out say that everyone with leaky gut is going to get an autoimmune disease. But I'll say this for sure, everyone with an autoimmune disease does have leaky gut. Let's address that term for a little bit, leaky gut. Because I know that term actually gets not a whole lot, it doesn't have a great reputation. It gets kind of a bad rap. And if you go to your medical doctor and say, you know what, I think I have leaky gut, they're going to laugh at you and probably say, oh, that's not a real thing. Well, can we stop dwelling on semantics and arguing over verbiage, please? Because if you go to that exact same doctor and say, hey, I believe I have increased intestinal permeability, then they'll actually stop and think and say, oh, you know what? That could be. Yeah, that could be. That makes sense. Well, you're saying the same darn thing, just with different words. So who cares? Who cares what we call it, guys? Let's not stress out about that, please. So let's talk a little bit more about zonulin and why it even does what it does. Why do we have a hormone that's intentionally trying to open up that GI barrier? Well, sometimes we want to do that. Sometimes we need it. What was that first cause? Bacterial imbalance of the GI tract. Bacterial imbalance of the GI tract. Okay. So now we start having let's say we start having a buildup of bacteria inside the gut, particularly if it's in the small intestines. If we're seeing bacteria in the small intestines, we have a real bad day because you're not supposed to see bacteria in the small intestines. When we talk about the good, healthy, normal bacteria, that's all supposed to be in the large intestine. And then you might say, well, isn't it coming in through your food? Because there's going to be bacteria on the food you eat. That ends up in the small intestines. No, because it's got to go somewhere first. Before it ever gets to the small intestines, it hits the stomach. And that stomach is going to flood it with acid. And it's going to sterilize that food that you're eating so that when it goes into the small intestines, it's properly sterilized and it's not actually going to have any bacteria on it left. Oh, wait. My doctor said that I have too much stomach acid, so I'm taking a medication to lower my stomach acid. Well, I could talk your ear off as to why that is actually not the case, but let me just sum it up by saying that acid reflux is not caused by high stomach acid, it's caused by low stomach acid. I know that sounds very backwards, but hear me out. When you eat something and it goes into the stomach to hit that stomach acid, the first role of that stomach acid is not going to be to break down the food or digestion. The first role is what, guys? Sterilization. So we need to hit it with that acidic environment to sterilize it, and then it needs to come from the stomach down to that first part of the small intestines. Once it hits that first part of the small intestines, there's actually receptors on there to see if it's acidic enough. If it's not acidic enough, your body's smart, guys. It knows, okay, this hasn't been properly sterilized, so what's it going to do? It's going to regurgitate that back into the stomach to go for round 2, and now try to get properly sterilized. That regurgitation process that's going to take the contents and squeeze it back up into the stomach, it has to be pretty forceful. So now some of that can actually perforate up into the esophagus because it actually is regurgitated a little bit too forcefully sometimes. And it's that acidity that's going up into the esophagus that gives you that acid reflux symptom, that burning in your throat. If you have enough stomach acid, now that regurgitation will not happen. So it's a little backwards way of thinking about it, but that's actually the real reason it happens. So let's say you go on omeprazole. You go on what's called a proton pump inhibitor to actually decrease your stomach acid. Oh, great, I no longer have acid reflux. It eliminates the symptom because now you have even less stomach acid, so you're not going to feel it when it gets regurgitated into the esophagus. But guess what, guys? It's actually making the problem worse in the long run. You're actually losing out on stomach acid in the long run, which is actually causing more of a problem. And then because you have too little stomach acid, or because you have such a bacterial overgrowth in the large intestines that it can't fit it all, and it actually starts to slide up into the small intestines, now you actually have bacteria there where it doesn't belong, and what's going to happen? The body's going to freak out. The immune system gets mad. It gets real mad. Why is there bacteria in here? It's going to assume that it has some kind of infectious process going on. So when you start taking care of that infection, your body, it's going to ramp up that immune response. It's going to become very inflamed. Starting to see a trend here. And then it wants to flush it out. So by opening up that intestinal barrier, by breaking down those tight junctions and allowing it to open, water can actually come out through the intestinal lining and try to flush out that excess bacteria that's in there. Again, it's not a disease, it's an adaptation mechanism. Because if your body didn't do that, for all your body knows, it's going to die because it has some kind of bacterial infection inside the small intestinal lining. So it has to deal with that in some way. Okay? So when we go back to looking at the small intestines by itself, we can see that the tight junctions are holding together. And when they start to become compromised, now you're going to trigger that immune system. You're going to trigger an IgG immune response, an IgA immune response, different B cells and T cells, and all these things. You're going to cause autoimmunity. You're going to cause food allergies. By the way, the exact same cells that do this, the exact same cells that maintain the GI barrier, also maintain the blood-brain barrier. So there's so many times when I hear, oh, well, that can't happen because of the blood-brain barrier. Oh, well, that's not real because of the blood-brain barrier. Oh, well, we don't need to worry about aluminum coming into the body because that can't cross the blood-brain barrier. Guess what? If you have leaky gut, you also have leaky brain. And things can slip right through the cracks because that blood-brain barrier is compromised and get up into the brain anyway. And there's a lot of very, very toxic things out there that are being completely blown off because they just assume that the blood-brain barrier is going to take care of everything. No, it has to be maintained. You have to take care of it and nurture it just like any other part of the body. Okay? Just like any other part of the body. So now we have this autoimmune process starting. We have this immune system starting to flare up and ramp up. And what did I talk about with those different I talked about IgGs and IgAs. What are those things? Well, those are different parts of the immune system. They actually produce antibodies. And I'm sure, especially over the last few years, you guys have heard the word antibody a lot, a whole bunch. So let me break this down a little bit. There's different types of these antibodies that can actually start to do things inside your body. Different types of these immunoglobulins is the actual term. And there's 5 of them. There's IgGs, A's, M's, E's, and D's. IgAs do primarily live in the gut. And everyone does know about an IgA response. If the IgAs get flared up, that's going to lead to celiac disease. So now the IgAs can cause a very acute response within the gut, and it can be a very extreme too, that leaves you actually in a lot of discomfort and a lot of pain. Well, what about IgGs? IgGs I don't think get enough credit because IgGs cause inflammation on the inside. They're going to cause inflammation. They're not going to give you a symptom. That's the thing. If you get sick and you actually have an acute virus, IgGs are the first things that are going to be produced because they're priming the immune system to deal with everything. They're not the ones that are actively doing the attacking, but they're priming everything to get it all set up. So if we're starting to produce IgGs, what are we also putting into the gut, guys? Not just bacteria. What's the main thing that we're putting into the GI tract every single day? Food. So now we start to have this overactive IgG response in the gut, and now those IgGs are actually being introduced to all this food that we're eating, and guess what happens now? We actually start to get IgG reactions to the food that we eat. And every time we eat that food then, once we start triggering IgGs, every single time we eat that food, now that food is going to become very inflammatory to you, even if it's normally considered a very healthy food. So we need to test for that. You know, should everyone just go eat broccoli and Brussels sprouts to be healthy? No. No, not everyone. My test tells me that the most inflammatory food to my body is lettuce. What the heck? Who thinks of lettuce as something that's damaging to the body? Who thinks of lettuce as something you should be avoiding? I do. Because if I don't avoid lettuce, I'm going to inflame my body and I'm going to end up with some kind of chronic health issues. So I need to avoid it. The best part, though, is that the immune system changes over time. Never forget that. If the immune system didn't change, oh my goodness, we wouldn't be alive because we wouldn't be adapting to our environment, and all the different infectious processes that we're constantly coming in contact with, they'd kill us off because we're not adapting to them. So once we start to see this change happen, we can actually start to see these foods come around and we can start to get some of these foods back. For me, lettuce has never come back. So I just need to avoid lettuce probably for possibly forever, but definitely a long time. So now over time, this inflammatory response starts to cause more and more damage throughout the body. Let's say that you have these IgG reactions going on in your body, but you don't know it because they don't actually give you a symptom. Or let's say you do know it and you tested for it, but you're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to actually avoid those foods. That's too hard. Okay, well, guess what? Now things have gotten to the point where you actually did end up with an autoimmune disease. And we have different names for all these different autoimmune diseases. If it's affecting the thyroid, you might have Hashimoto's, or you have the very poorly named one, Graves' disease, because that makes it sound like you're going to die. These are all just named after the doctor who first discovered them. So Dr. Hashimoto from Japan discovered autoimmune hypothyroidism, so you have too little thyroid function. Dr. Graves discovered autoimmune hyperthyroidism. So now autoimmune destruction of that thyroid gland is actually causing it to produce too much hormone. That's okay, that happens. You may have rheumatoid arthritis where your joints are becoming degenerated. If it's going to the nervous system, well, now you have MS. Okay, now it's going to the muscles. Well, now you might have lupus. You might have myasthenia gravis. You might have all these we have different names for all these different things, guys. But here's what I'm trying to tell you. Don't stress out about the name, because what we call it is not important. It doesn't matter what we call it, okay? Please don't worry about that. Oh, I have rheumatoid arthritis. Good for you. I have Hashimoto's disease. Okay, great. What's the difference between those two? What's the difference between those two? Honestly, just where in the body it's being affected. For you, that overactive inflammatory response that the immune system started to cause degeneration and destruction of the joints. For you, it's causing degeneration, destruction of the thyroid gland. For you, it's happening in the nervous system. And you might be experiencing it in very different ways, but when you break it down to its most basic component, where is it coming from? It's coming from the immune system. If you have Hashimoto's disease, you don't have a thyroid problem. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, you don't have a joint problem. If you have multiple sclerosis, you don't have a nervous system problem. In all of those cases, you have an immune system problem. So if, like I said, if all we do is stare at where you're having the symptom, we stare at the thyroid, we stare at the nerves, you're going to miss the boat. And you're not going to ever find out where it's coming from. There's lots of different places it comes from. Now, the actual disease process is going to start in the gut. But there's a lot of places that could actually, a lot of other things that could actually cause an inflammatory response to begin with. And guess what, guys? Viruses are on the table. EpsteinBarr virus. A lot of people refer to that as mono. Yes, this is a virus that once you get it, will be in your body for the rest of your life. And if you don't have a proper working immune system to be able to keep that suppressed, well, guess what? Now you're going to have a problem. Now that's going to constantly cause its inflammatory response and can lead to much more destructive things down the road. One thing it can definitely lead to is, in fact, autoimmune issues. Now, I do just want to pause for a second and kind of clarify a little bit, because I do this a lot where I actually will say, in one sentence, I'll say that your immune system's too strong, and sometimes in the same sentence, I'll say your immune system's too weak. So, which is it? If you have an autoimmune disease, is your immune system too strong or is it too weak? The answer is yes. Okay? Because here's what happens. There's many parts of the immune response. So the immune system isn't just one thing. That's why we don't even really use that term around here that much. We call it the immune response, because it's responding to the environment. It's responding to triggers that come through. It's responding to anything that it's actually going to be flared up by. So if we actually start to look at all the different components and all of the things that are being triggered, well, this part over here that's now causing damage to your own body in an autoimmune response, that is actually really ramped up. Over here, it's actually now very suppressed, okay? So we have to start actually paying attention and looking to where in the body it's being affected, where in the body it's happening. Because you can have an overactive immune system and still have your immune system be very weak. So pay attention to that, please, because it's going to be different for everyone. So if your immune system becomes compromised, becomes weak, now it can't handle this virus, that can lead to a lot of the issues. Do infections only happen in the bloodstream? Do you only see these viruses happen in the blood? No. You can have infections happen other places too. So this is a GI test. We're actually testing bacteria in the gut. Now where you see green, the top three are the good bacteria that we want to see at very high levels. I want to see all three of those at a +4. Well, the top two aren't growing at all, and the third one, it's at a 3, not a 4. So definitely we're seeing some compromise in there. We go to that additional bacteria section, we see all those other bacteria. Those are bacteria we don't even want in the gut. They have no business being there. But most of them are green. Green is not terrible. Green means that it's not pathogenic. They're just in the way, they're taking up space. But look at that yellow one. Klebsiella oxytoca. I like bacteria names, they're fun. But Klebsiella oxytoca, that's now, if it were only a 1, 2, or 3, if it was only overgrown that much, it would be considered non-infectious. But in this person, it's all the way up to a 4. It's all the way up to a 4. And because it's a 4, it now is colored yellow, which means that we now do call it a bacterial infection. So this person has a bacterial infection, but they don't only have bacteria in their gut. Look at the bottom. Look at the bottom. We also see candida. So they also have a yeast infection as well, because that's also yellow. So this person has a lot of infectious processes going on inside their gut. Do you think that's triggering an immune response? I hope so, because honestly, if it's not, that's a bigger problem, because now their immune system isn't even paying attention to all the stuff going on in the gut, right? And then over time, that overactive inflammatory response will start to cause damage, start to cause destruction within the body. Okay? What are some other things that can actually cause inflammation in the body? Is it only infectious responses? No, there's lots of other things that can do it. Whole boatload of other things you can do it. I would really severely look at diet when it comes to anything autoimmune. We already talked about grains, but let's look at other inflammatory foods. One of the top inflammatory foods out there is dairy, cow's milk. Have you ever heard that milk does a body good? Well, guess what? We all know that because of their advertising. They paid billions, and I mean billions of dollars, to convince us all that some of the unhealthiest foods on the planet are the healthiest foods on the planet. Soy. You might have heard of soy as a really good, protein alternative to something that's not meat-based. Oh yeah, soy's a lot less fatty than meat, so I can eat soy and still get a lot of really good quality protein. Please don't do that. Please don't do that, because that's going to be very highly inflammatory to the body, cause a lot of damage. cause a lot of problems and issues in there. So let's stay away from that. Where else do we see toxicity within the body? Where else can we see toxic stress happen? Well, we're putting toxic things into our body every single day. For example, look at your mouth. Look at your mouth. If your mouth glows like this on an x-ray, that means that you have a whole bunch of metal in your mouth. All those amalgam fillings, a lot of times they call them silver fillings. I don't call them silver fillings. What do I call them? I call them mercury fillings. Because inside every single one of those metal fillings is mercury. What's a healthy amount of mercury you want to have in your body? Yeah, I'm going to say none. I'm going to say none. We don't want these toxic things inside our body. And you might even be thinking, well, it's isolated in my mouth, no big deal. No, every container leaks to some extent. And if that mercury starts leaking, where's it going to go? Only one place, down the hatch. So now you're getting all that mercury inside your body. And I've heard so many arguments about this. Well, it's not really all that much. It's not enough to matter. And that's true. Does everyone with mercury fillings in their mouth end up with autoimmune disease? Of course not. It's just another stack. It's just another piece. We're filling a bucket, guys, and it's just another thing we're putting in that bucket. And over time, that bucket's going to get so full that it's going to start to overflow. That bucket's going to eventually tip over because there's so much in it, and this is just another thing we're putting in that bucket. So no, not all metal fillings are going to cause autoimmune disease. That's an absurd statement, but it's just another thing. And if you already have other things going on that are causing that stress inside that body, now this can just be that extra thing that just pushes you over the edge. We had a patient come in who had some pretty severe autoimmune issues going on. She was very tired all the time. She was starting to see her function go down and down and down. And we were doing everything we could to try to figure out where it was coming from. Her gut was not looking great, so we were doing a lot of work on her gut, helping heal her gut, see a lot of change happening in there. Didn't really change a whole lot with her symptoms. We saw a lot of progress internally, but she still felt really run down. She still felt terrible. She felt sick all the time. Okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? We looked at all kinds of different things. We tested her immune system in depth. Her immune system was actually very, very weak. We're like, what is causing these issues? What is actually causing that? And it took some time, and it took a lot of hard conversations, but we eventually had an idea of what was likely causing it. And she indeed had something removed from her body. Any guess what these are? Any guess what this is right here? These are her breast implants that she had removed. What's all that black stuff all over them? Yeah, they were completely caked in mold. They were completely caked in mold. She had lots of mold inside her body that was actually growing on her breast implants. And only by getting those removed did she ever see any relief, because she had to get that mold out of her body. So we had to start to pay attention to that. We had to actually deal with that and start to help her out in that way. So when we want to start to test for these things, when we want to start to actually see what we're going to do about it, how are we going to help you out? How are we going to first identify that you have an autoimmune disease, and then how are we going to actually see that progress change and that progress happen? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I had another patient come in who she was having trouble digesting certain foods, and her vitamin B12 was always incredibly low, and she had very low energy and was having to get B12 shots regularly, quite regularly. So we worked with her a lot, and she had a lot of gut issues that we cleared up quite a bit. But her energy was still really low. That never changed. And she still had to get those B12 injections. When she got them, she felt great. When she didn't get them, she felt terrible. And I was giving her those nutrients. Didn't help. Giving her those nutrients didn't help. Well, eventually I knew there was a little bit more going on. There's a little more going on. What is that? What are we dealing with in here? And then we figured it out. And I know that's hard to read, but we figured out that she actually did have an autoimmune issue going on inside her gut. Particularly, the autoimmune issue that she had, excuse me, was causing damage and destruction to those cells in the GI tract that actually uptake B12. So now we knew that there's a lot more going on, and how did we actually help her out? We had to actually bring those antibodies down that were causing the damage. And yes, I said the word antibody, because when you're testing for autoimmune disease, every autoimmune marker you're looking at is an antibody. Are we supposed to have high levels of antibodies in our body at any given time? No. But wait, I had chicken pox, and now if I come in contact with somebody who has chicken pox now, I don't get it. I don't get chicken pox if I come in contact with it, because I've already had it. I have the antibodies for it. No. No, 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 no. You're not supposed to have high antibodies. Antibodies are produced when you come in contact with something, but then after you lose that contact, they're supposed to go away. But what you do have is something called memory cells. This is what's called the acquired immune response. You have these memory cells that are actually paying attention to things, and they know that you came in contact with that before. You know, I have a 3-year-old at home, and when he gets sick, do I always get sick? No. Sometimes I do, but a lot of times I don't, because the virus that he's currently dealing with, and yes, he has a little cold right now, I didn't get sick from it because I've come in contact with that in the past. Now, he might get a different strain of that virus later on, and I might end up with it, and that's fine, but my immune system can deal with that, and it's not a big deal. So when we're looking at antibody levels, high levels of antibodies are always bad. Am I contradicting the narrative that's been going out for the last, goodness, I'm going to say decades, but in particular the last couple years, the last 3 years? You better believe it. You better believe it. Because the whole plan, the whole medical plan to deal with infections nowadays is to give you something, inject something into your body that's going to ramp up your antibody production. And that's all it does. How are we going to test to see if you're still immune to that virus? Well, let's test your antibodies. Let's run your titers. Oh, look, your antibodies are still high. Great. You're still fine. You're still immune to that. Ooh, what do those antibodies do? What does having those high levels of antibodies for so long do? Oh yeah, this one will keep my antibodies for the measles up for 10 years. Ooh, really? Do we want that? Do we want to have really high antibodies in our system for 10 years to some virus that we're never even coming in contact with in the first place? That's a problem. That's a problem. And that can lead to a lot of degenerative change inside our body. Now, will it lead to an autoimmune disease? Not always. But guess what, guys? Do you remember how those rates of autoimmune diseases have been going up and up and up and up and up? Other things have been going up at that same rate. So let's please pay attention to that too. Let's please pay attention to how we're actually handling our immune system and how we're actually taking care of ourselves properly. Let's stop just trying to keep those antibodies high. Let's actually take care of yourself and take care of your body as a whole. And we test these antibodies. We test these antibodies regularly. And Brendan, just keep these up for a little while, because this patient came in with lots of issues going on. In particular, look at those thyroid antibodies. Thyroid peroxidase ABS. And ABS, I'm not talking about brakes. I'm talking about antibodies. Okay? So this test says that if you're under 60, you know, your body can deal with that. It's not anything to really stress out about immediately. She was at 6,945. Holy cow, 6,945. Now, I haven't included her other labs in here, but we immediately looked at the gut, and she had 2 different bacterial infections. She had yeast infection as well, and 2 parasites. Lots of things going on. So over time, we started healing that gut. We started calming that immune system down. We started dealing with those infections. And we tested her gut again, and we actually saw those infections go down. We started to see one of those parasites leave entirely. and then we retest it. Now, her thyroid antibodies have gone down. They were 6945, now they're 2,431. Still very high, but significantly lower than they were. Significantly lower than they were. Now you might notice that her TSH is very low here on the lab, because yes, she was on a thyroid medication, but we're seeing so much improvement in her thyroid gland now that she's being over-medicated. So when we ran these labs, I had to tell her, hey, your medication dosage now is too high. You can actually start to come down in that medication. Did I tell her to change the medication? Of course not. But I told her to go back to that prescribing physician and talk to them about getting down in that medication. Bring this lab into them, and let's see about reducing that dosage there. And as we continued to work with her and continue to see change, we just kept seeing those numbers go down. 1661 now. And her most recent one went down again. It went down again. Now, 1,189. And she's actually getting her blood drawn again to test this within a few weeks. But I'll tell you what, she's now completely off her thyroid medication. She doesn't need it anymore. I didn't tell her to stop taking it. Her medical doctor did. Because when she first came in, she needed a thyroid medication. Now she doesn't. She still has a lot of damage and destruction happening to her gland, but we're working on healing her body. We're working on repair. We're working on restoring normal function. So does autoimmune disease have no cure? Doesn't. She still is autoimmune. She's still autoimmune, but we're working on bringing that down and bringing that down and bringing that down. And I'm fully confident that someday she won't have those anymore. I'm fully confident that someday we'll be able to make these go away entirely. You can pull it down now, Brandon. Because what we forget is that the body is designed to heal. The body is designed to heal. If I slice my arm open, I'm bleeding real bad. Would you just assume that I'm going to bleed out and die? No. Your assumption is that eventually that will heal. Now, we might wrap it to slow the bleeding down. We might do something to it. But you would have full confidence that that would heal and I wouldn't bleed out and have any long-term effects from that. Well, why can't the internal organs heal? Why can't the body internally heal? Guess what? It can. It can. But when all we're doing is giving you a thyroid medication because you have Hashimoto's, you have autoimmune destruction of that thyroid gland, and all we're doing is giving you thyroid medication and just increasing the dosage as it continues to get worse and worse and worse, now it's never going to heal because we're not changing the environment. We're not changing that internal damaging, destructive environment. Only then can we actually see healing take place. We have to get rid of that inflammation. We have to find the causes. If we never looked at that woman's gut, we never would have healed her thyroid. We need to look at the whole body. Don't just symptom chase. Here's an analogy I like to use. If you get up every morning and you're about to go to work, but before you leave the house, someone punches you in the face, are you going to go to work and function at full capacity that day? Probably not. Probably not. And what if that happens every single day? Over time, you're going to start to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's going to start to take a major toll on your body. And if we never change anything, if we never change that damaging environment that you're in, things are just going to continue to progress and continue to worsen as you go. And then you go to work, and now your boss is yelling at you. Hey, why aren't you being as productive as you used to be? And you start to get reprimanded, and you start to fear that you might actually lose your job. Not because you're doing anything wrong or doing anything different, but because you're being damaged. You're actually being harmed, and you're living in a very destructive environment. Change that environment. Get rid of that destructive nature of that environment, and only then can you see that healing and that progress take place. Okay? So as we start to change the internal environment from a damaging, destructive one and actually make it a more healing, nurturing one instead, now you can see that take place. You can heal the gut. You can heal the joints. You can heal the thyroid. Now, sometimes the damage is already there. If you have rheumatoid arthritis and you've seen damage and destruction to those joints, odds are they're not going to actually heal. But what you can do is you can slow down, if not completely stop, the degenerative change that's going on. And just because you've had it and you have that degenerative change doesn't mean you need to be in pain. Okay? There's lots of people I've seen who are no longer in pain, even though they still have that joint degeneration. They still have that destruction there, but the inflammation's not there anymore, so they can actually function normally. They actually can go about their daily life and do things without being in pain. It's absolutely amazing. So pay attention to the inside. Pay attention to what's going on within the whole body, and only then can you actually see that autoimmune response actually happen. Okay? So let's move on to a little bit of a product overview. Let's see what we can actually do to help with all this. When we talk about autoimmune disease, favorite herb, I love starting with it. One of the big things we're always going to take a look at is something called Romania. Romania is amazing. It does so many great things. It actually supports the adrenal function. It supports liver health, healthy response to stress, which is big time. Because when I say stress, I don't just mean mental stress. I mean physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress. It helps with the gut too, which is amazing, and normal fluid elimination. But what's the other big thing it's going to do? Romania is actually going to really start to help bring the inflammatory response down. What did I say one of the top medications was for autoimmune disease? Corticosteroids. Corticosteroids. Here, let's go on prednisone. Let's start to give you something that's going to suppress the inflammation, suppress your immune response, and now you're not going to be in pain. Now we're not going to see that autoimmune destruction happening. Well, that's very dangerous when we use an external source. But guess what? Your body can make its own. I know. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Your body can actually make its own steroids. Now, it's a little different than the type of steroid you're thinking of, right? So we talk about anabolic steroids, for example. So we're going to be like, hey, we're going to give you some steroids to make you real pumped up and jacked when you're lifting weight. That's one type of steroid where an external source is very damaging, but the stuff that your body makes on its own is actually very good. Here, this test is actually showing you how the adrenal glands make cortisol, cortisol being the hormone that actually responds to stress. Cortisol converts into cortisone, however. Wait, cortisone, I've heard of that. Yes, you might put a cortisone cream on your skin, things like that. That's an external source of cortisone. That external source of cortisone is actually going to suppress your immune system kind of globally. This cortisone is going to bring down an inflammatory response. Romania is going to actually convert cortisol into cortisone. So now we're actually going to bring down that inflammatory response, bring down that immune response that's causing the autoimmune destruction of our own bodies, so that we can now allow that proper healing to occur. So am I saying that if you're autoimmune, start taking Romania immediately and your autoimmune disease will go away? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because this is symptom chasing. That's putting a Band-Aid on it and saying, take this to feel better. That's never what I want to do. Don't just take something to feel better. If that's all I'm doing, if all I'm doing is giving you something to make you feel really good, I have failed you. We all have. If any doctor is giving you something to make you feel better, and that's their entire plan, they have failed you. They're not helping you. They're not helping you heal. They're not helping your body repair. They're not helping you get healthier. You might feel great. How long? How long do you feel great? As long as you're taking it. You only feel good as long as you're taking that thing. So let's stop taking that thing, and all of a sudden you're going to feel like absolute trash again. So that's not acceptable. Yes, I'll give you Romania for temporary relief as we're starting to make that internal change. It's going to even help us make that internal change, which is wonderful. But if we're not changing all of those inflammatory triggers that got us here in the first place, it's not doing you any good. You can never out-supplement a poor diet. If you're still injecting things in your body to ramp up your antibody response, guess what? You're never going to heal. You're never going to make a normal immune response. If you don't start to get those mercury fillings removed from your mouth or not getting new ones in the first place, we're not going to see that healing change. If we're not actually healing the gut and sealing up that leaky gut and restoring the integrity of that barrier, we're never going to see long-term permanent change. Because all of our goals, all of our thinking is to restore function in the body, allow the body to heal, allow the body to repair. And only through that process can we actually see that long-term change happen. What's our motto, guys? What is the wellness way? What do we do? Quite frankly, it's right in our little slogan. We're a network of health restoration clinics. Health restoration. There's a huge difference between restoration and symptom management. Pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. When you're told that there's no cure, well, there's no cure with their perspective. And that's because they're even using the word cure. Stop using that word. Don't think about curing a disease. Think about restoring that function, restoring that damage that's gone on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time paying attention to what we call it. I don't care what we call it. I don't care the name. Health Restoration Clinic that think and act differently to solve the health challenges others can't. That's who we are, and that's what we do, and we provide a different perspective. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching. Go out and make a difference in someone's lives. If you know someone who needs to hear this information, please tell them. All of our clinics do local health talks, and we got them all over the country. There's going to be an autoimmune talk this month at every single one of our clinics. There's going to be inflammation talks every 2 weeks at every single one of our offices. Go there. Listen to what the doctor has to say. Listen to our perspective. Listen to our whole thought process. And help those that you care about start to think differently. Because only then will their body actually be able to heal and start to get the proper help that they need. Help them take control of their life again. Start taking control of your life at this point and get that change. Make that change happen. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video or live stream. Each week on A Different Perspective, we bring you the most cutting-edge information on health you won't find anywhere else. For more information on this topic, please visit our website. A Different Perspective offers life-changing information and resources to share and explore. A Different Perspective is leading a health revolution.